Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at this period that, well, the material you shared calls it a seismic event, the French Revolution, 1789. And those ideas, they didn't just stay in France, did they? They immediately started agitating the big monarchies. Britain, Austria, Prussia. They felt it right away.
Oh, absolutely. And this material really shows how that internal French chaos just spilled outwards. It wasn't just their problem, it became Europe's problem, challenging that whole established order.
Exactly. So our mission here, for you listening, is to navigate this really, really tumultuous time, the French Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars.
All right.
We're going to trace Napoleon's incredible rise, from a talented commander to emperor. We'll unpack the context of these coalitions forming against France and really zoom in on the Battle of Austerlitz, the strategy, the fallout, all based on what's in these sources.
The goal being to get you quickly up to speed on this pivotal moment, its key drivers, and, well, what it all meant.
So let's kick off right after the revolution. The Revolutionary Wars start in 1792. What was the spark? It wasn't just about land, was it?
No, not really. I mean, yeah, France had expansionist ideas, but a huge piece was this fervent desire to spread the revolution in liberty, equality, fraternity.
A direct challenge to the kings and emperors.
Exactly, and they reacted fast. That's the first coalition. Britain, Austria, Prussia, leading the charge against revolutionary France.
Okay, the old guard pushing back.
Yeah.
But France, fueled by this revolutionary energy, they actually did pretty well for a while, despite facing everyone.
They did surprisingly well. That revolutionary zeal is like a force multiplier.
Yeah.
And they had the dynamic commanders like Napoleon, even early on, winning key victories.
Interesting. So that first coalition, it didn't last. The material mentions the Treaty of Campo Formio in 1797. Austria drops out.
Right. France made some big gains, knocked Austria out.
Right.
But the war wasn't actually over. The big one, France versus Britain, that kept going.
Okay, so Britain's still in the fight. The French government then, the Directory, they thought about invading Britain directly.
They did consider it. But the material points out it was just, well, the cost was seen as prohibitive, too difficult, too expensive.
Ah, the English Channel and the Royal Navy problem.
Precisely. So if you can't go across the channels, you go elsewhere. They shifted focus to the Mediterranean.
And that's where Napoleon comes in again, leading the expedition to Egypt in May 1798.
Exactly. He was already a hero, popular. Sending him to Egypt served multiple purposes for the Directory, shifting the conflict being one of them.
Okay, so Napoleon's off campaigning in Egypt. What's happening back in Europe? Is it quiet?
Not for long. That peace after Campo Formio was fragile. With Napoleon away, tensions just flared right back up. Those old antagonisms hadn't gone away.
And that leads to another coalition.
Yes, the second coalition forms in 1798, and this one was even bigger. Britain, German states, Austria back in, Naples, the Ottomans, ironically given Egypt, Russia, Portugal. The war was back on, full scale.
And this is where Napoleon's personal story takes that massive leap, right? Things go badly for France at home, and he sees his chance.
He absolutely does. He hears about the deteriorating situation, leaves his army in Egypt, and races back to Paris.
Arriving at just the right moment.
Perfect timing. The Directory was weak, unpopular, people wanted stability, strong leadership. Napoleon was the figure they looked to.
And he links up with Sieyès and that group planning a coup.
Right. Sieyès had the political plan, but Napoleon brought the military clout and, crucially, the public popularity. They exploited the chaos, November 1799, and boom, the Directory is overthrown.
Power initially goes to 3 consuls, and Napoleon's just one of them. Sort of.
Yeah, technically.
Yeah.
He was given a temporary consulship. It looked like a shared power arrangement. But this is where Napoleon's, the material calls it, magnificent opportunism.
Huh. Okay, what happened?
Just 1 month later, 1 month, he completely sidelines Sieyès, pushes everyone else aside, and declares himself first consul. He's only 30 years old, and he's effectively seized total control.
Wow. Just like that. And the material is pretty blunt about what this means.
Very blunt. It states this is the end. The end of the revolution as a movement, the end of the republic. France is now, for all intents and purposes, a dictatorship under Napoleon. So Napoleon's first consul, what's his first move? It wasn't diving straight into those big reforms, was it?
No, the war was still raging, right? The second coalition was still active.
Exactly. Job 1 was dealing with the war. And under his leadership, things started turning around for the French armies again, especially against the Austrians.
And the key battle here, highlighted in the sources, is Marengo, June 1800. Napoleon commanding in person.
He was there, leading from the front. His first big battlefield win as head of state. It was a tough fight in Italy, but a decisive victory against the Austrians.
And Marengo seems like a watershed moment. The material suggests many historians see this as the real start of the Napoleonic era. Why Marengo specifically?
Well, it cemented his power. Winning personally showed he wasn't just a politician who got lucky in a coup, he was a brilliant military leader in charge. And strategically, it basically knocked Austria out of the Second Coalition.
Leading to another treaty?
Yep, the Treaty of Luneville in February 1801. Austria's out, the coalition is crumbling again.
Just like the first one, leaving Britain isolated.
Isolated, and frankly, probably a bit tired of bankrolling continental coalitions that kept failing.
Yeah.
So Britain finally came to the table. They signed the Treaty of Amiens with France in March 1802.
Okay, so peace breaks out across Europe. For a bit.
Yep.
The material calls it a breather.
A breather is exactly right. Very temporary. Because Napoleon used this peace brilliantly. For himself.
How so?
He capitalized on being the peace bringer, organized a public vote, a plebiscite, and got himself declared consul for life. Full control. Absolute power. He also became head of the new Italian Republic he'd set up.
He definitely wasn't sitting still once he had that power locked down.
First, he neutralized any lingering opposition. Then he launched into this massive program of rebuilding France. This is where those famous civil reforms come in.
And the material draws a really interesting line, connecting these reforms to his military success.
It does. It argues his military genius is undeniable, but his victories were built on the foundation of these reforms. Addressing basic needs, the Napoleonic Code, creating legal uniformity, education reform, completely reorganizing the army, meritocracy. It created a stronger, more efficient France that could sustain his campaigns.
So he's building this powerful French state, hoping to spread its influence, maybe those revolutionary ideals, maybe just French power. He needed peace for that, right? Long-term peace.
Ideally, yes. To really reshape society and project influence, you need stability. The material is clear. That kind of lasting peace just wasn't in the cards after the Second Coalition, because nobody was really happy with the outcome. The treaties, Luneville, Amiens, they left lingering resentments and unsatisfied ambitions on all sides, especially between the two main players who never really stopped seeing each other as the primary threat, France and Britain. That guaranteed the peace wouldn't hold. And yeah, that underlying tension just inevitably boiled over again. Britain was deeply uncomfortable with France getting stronger and stronger, spreading its influence,
And Napoleon wasn't exactly playing defense. He wanted more territory, more control, setting up satellite states. Plus, that old colonial rivalry never went away.
Never. It was just a matter of time. France declared war on Britain in May 1803. Round 3, the coalition wars, was on. Initially, it was mostly naval, economic warfare between the two.
But Napoleon wanted something more decisive.
Oh yeah. He wanted the knockout blow, which led to his big plan. Invade Britain. He started assembling this massive army, La Grande Armée, at Boulogne, right on the Channel coast.
The invasion camp. But how to get them across? That was always the sticking point, wasn't it?
Always. France had this incredible land army, maybe the best in the world. But Britain had the Royal Navy. Total dominance at sea. The material really emphasizes this contrast.
So Britain couldn't really attack France effectively on land, but they could stop France from landing in Britain. What was their plan?
Two main things. One, use the Navy to blockade French ports, bottle up their fleet, prevent any invasion crossing. Two, use their money and diplomacy to build another coalition on the continent, get other countries to fight France on land for them.
And Napoleon's next big political move kind of played right into their hands for that second part.
It really did. In 1804, he takes the ultimate step, declares himself Emperor of the French.
And the material mentions a vote count for that. Huge support.
Yeah, something like 3.5 million yes votes to only about 2,500 no. Massive popular backing, or at least appearance of it. Then, in 1805, he crowns himself King of Italy, too.
Okay, so maybe popular in France, but how did that go down with the other monarchs in Europe?
Exactly as you'd expect. Utter horror. It confirmed all their fears about Napoleon's ambition and France's revolutionary power grab. This, more than anything, pushed Russia, Austria, and others back towards Britain.
And bingo, early 1805, the third coalition is formed. Who's in this time?
Britain, Russia, Austria, Naples, Sicily, Sweden. A powerful lineup. Against them, France had its allies. Spain, some southern German states like Bavaria and Württemberg, and its existing satellite kingdoms.
So the stage is set. Napoleon's got his Grande Armée, maybe 200,000 strong, highly trained, organized under this new system. facing them, potentially 500,000 coalition troops from countries representing, 66 million people?
Yeah, it's a massive confrontation brewing on the continent.
Now, the coalition had a plan, right? Developed by the Austrian High Command, the Aulic Council, but the material suggests it wasn't exactly brilliant.
No, it highlights some pretty major flaws. They decided North Italy was the main theater, sending their best commander, Archduke Charles, down there with almost 100,000 men.
Okay, main effort in Italy. What else?
A secondary Austrian army, under Ferdinand and Mack, about 75,000, was supposed to move up the Danube, pressure Napoleon's German allies, and wait for the Russians.
Wait for the Russians. How many were coming?
3 large Russian armies were marching west, maybe 90,000 total, supposed to link up, plus another smaller Austrian force under Archduke John to connect things.
So what were the big problems with this, according to the source?
Well, first, they picked the wrong main front. Italy wasn't where the decisive action was going to be. Second, command issues coordinating a multinational army is always tough. Third, timing. They even had problems because the Russians used a different calendar, messing up their rendezvous calculations.
Different calendars. Wow. Okay. Meanwhile, Napoleon's army is different. This core system. Tell us about that.
The core system. This was revolutionary, and the material notes it influenced armies for ages. Napoleon broke his Grande Armée into several large corps, maybe 15,000 to 40,000 men each.
And what was special about them?
Each corps was basically a mini army in itself. It had its own infantry, cavalry, artillery, engineers, even medical support. It could operate independently for a time.
What did that allow Napoleon to do?
Huge advantages. Easier supply because they spread out. They could march incredibly fast using multiple roads, only converging for battle. Constant communication meant they could support each other. And a clear command structure within each corps meant speed and flexibility.
So when the invasion of Britain was definitely off the table after Trafalgar, he turned this machine towards the continent. What was the plan against that flawed coalition strategy?
Classic Napoleon. Speed and surprise, don't let them unite.
Yeah.
He realized the main Austrian force under Mack on the Danube was vulnerable before the Russians got there. So he wheeled the entire Grande Armée away from the Channel.
An incredible march across Europe.
Astonishing speed. They reached the Rhine in September 1805. The goal: destroy Mack army on the Danube before Kutuzov and the main Russian force arrived. He left Marshal Massena in Italy with 50,000 men just to keep Archduke Charles busy.
And this lightning move leads to the Ulm Campaign, September-October 1805.
Exactly. The French crossed the Rhine late September. Murat's cavalry made diversionary moves to make the Austrians think they were coming from the west. But the main army did this huge, silent envelopment, swinging around from the north and east.
Sneaking up behind them.
Pretty much. By early October, they'd closed the net. General Mack and his entire Austrian army were suddenly surrounded near Ulm, completely cut off. They barely knew what hit them. And Kutuzov's Russians, still weeks away.
So what happened at Ulm itself? Was it a big battle, October 16th, 19th?
Less a pitched battle, more a surrender. Mack was trapped, there was some fighting, but Napoleon basically forced the surrender of the entire army with minimal French losses, like 500 dead, maybe 1,500 casualties total for the French, compared to 60,000 Austrians captured, including 30 generals. A whole army neutralized just like that.
Wow. Defeated by maneuver, not just fighting.
The material calls it a flawless envelopment. One of Napoleon's most brilliant tactical victories, achieved through speed, deception, and positioning.
Okay, huge win at Ulm. But you mentioned Trafalgar earlier. That news arrived around the same time.
Almost exactly. The surrender at Ulm is wrapping up, and then comes the news. October 21st, 1805, off the coast of Spain, Admiral Nelson has annihilated the combined French and Spanish fleet. 2/3 of their ships gone.
And the significance of Trafalgar, the material says it's absolutely fundamental.
Cannot be overstated. It ended totally and utterly any realistic hope Napoleon had of ever invading Britain. It secured British naval supremacy for the next 100 years, beyond dispute, as the source says.
So you have this stark contrast emerging.
Exactly. France becomes the undisputed master of the land on the continent. Britain is the unchallenged master of the seas. Two whales, unable to truly fight each other directly. That shapes everything going forward. Right, so Ulm is done. Huge success. But Napoleon can't rest. His focus immediately shifts to Kutuzov and the Russians who just arrived near Brauna.
And he's got to be quick, right? The clock is ticking. Other threats are closing in.
Absolutely. Kutuzov's 36,000 are just the first wave. Other Russian armies under Buxhoeveden and Bennigsen are marching west. There are Austrian remnants gathering. Archduke Charles is trying to get back from Italy. And maybe the biggest worry, Prussia. Still neutral, but potentially hostile, with a massive army sitting on his flank.
So Kutuzov hears about Ulm. What does he do? Stand and fight.
No way. Kutuzov was smart, cautious. He knew he was outnumbered and isolated. He immediately ordered a skillful retreat, heading north of the Danube, away from Vienna, destroying bridges as he went to slow the French pursuit.
And the French pursuit, was it immediate and perfect?
Not quite. There was a bit of a wobble. Marshal Murat, leading the French advance guard, got slightly distracted by the idea of capturing Vienna itself.
The glittering prize.
Exactly. That deviation, plus a slight delay securing the Danube bridges near Vienna later, gave Kutuzov a crucial window to escape the immediate trap.
Did Kutuzov do anything else to buy time?
Yes, he detached a rear guard under Prince Bagration. At Hollabrunn, on November 16th, Bagration, with only about 7,000 men, fought this incredibly tenacious delaying action against a much larger French force. It cost them dearly, but it bought the main Russian army vital time.
So the French keep pushing. They reach Znaim, then Brunn by late November. But they're getting stretched.
Very much so. The material really emphasizes this. The French army, by the time they paused near Brunn, was exhausted. They had marched hundreds of miles. They were far from their supply bases, spread out. Winter was setting in. They were actually in a pretty vulnerable spot.
Vulnerable to being surrounded themselves if the coalition could just link up.
Precisely. If Kutuzov linked up with the other arriving Russians and the remaining Austrians, and if Prussia decided to jump in, Napoleon could be in real trouble.
And this is where Napoleon makes another one of those incredibly bold moves.
He does. He sees the danger, but decides standing still is worse. The only way out is forward force a decisive battle now. He decides to lure the combined coalition army, which had now gathered near Olmütz with Tsar Alexander himself present, into attacking him.
Lure them? How?
Pure psychological warfare and strategic deception. He moved about 50,000 men forward towards Austerlitz and Wischau. Then he deliberately started spreading rumors that his army was weak, overextended, in a difficult situation.
And crucially,
he deliberately weakened his own right flank. He pulled troops back from the town of Austerlitz, from Wischau, and most importantly from the dominant high ground in the center, the Pratzen Heights.
Making it look like an easy target, baiting the trap.
Exactly. He made his right flank look invitingly weak, and the coalition took the bait. Tsar Alexander, young, eager for glory, overruled the cautious advice of Kutuzov and the Austrian Emperor Francis. He saw the weak French right, saw the chance to cut Napoleon off from Vienna, and ordered the attack. Napoleon had drawn them onto the battlefield he wanted, on his terms.
So, December 2nd, 1805, near Austerlitz, the Battle of the Three Emperors, Napoleon, Tsar Alexander, Emperor Francis. What are the forces looking like?
Okay, numbers. French. About 74,500 total. That breaks down to roughly 58,000 infantry, 11,500 cavalry, nearly 5,000 artillerymen with 157 guns.
And the coalition?
Slightly fewer men overall, around 72,800, but structured differently. About 50,000 infantry, 14,000 cavalry, but significantly more artillery, almost 8,000 gunners, and 318 guns. And mostly Russian. About 77% of the Allied force was Russian.
And their plan, as Napoleon intended, was to hit that seemingly weak French right flank near the villages Telnitz and Sokolnitz. Roll them up from the south.
That was precisely their plan. Pile into the weak flank, envelop the French army.
But Napoleon's actual plan was the counterpunch. The weak flank was just bait.
Absolutely. It was a deliberate trap. He wanted them to commit huge forces there, pulling troops away from their own center, especially from the Pratzen Heights. His real blow would be a massive attack straight up onto those weakened heights, splitting their army right down the middle.
But for that to work,
well,
one thing was absolutely critical.
Yes. Marshal Davout. His Third Corps had been marching like mad for nearly 2 days straight. They had to arrive in time to hold that right flank against the initial massive coalition attack. If they didn't make it, the whole plan collapses.
The tension must have been unbelievable. So walk us through how the battle unfolded, according to the material.
It starts early, around 7 a.m. The coalition advance guard hits the French right near Telnitz and Sokolnitz. There's thick morning fog, which helps conceal their numbers initially. Heavy columns start pushing the French defenders back.
Is Davout there?
Just. The material says Davout's exhausted troops arrived just in time, filtering into position after that incredible 50-hour march. They immediately stabilized the French right flank, holding against enormous pressure.
What happens as the fog lifts?
Around 8 a.m., the sun starts burning through the mist, and Napoleon from his command post can see it happening. Allied columns are pouring south off the Pratzen Heights, heading down into the valley to reinforce the attack on his right. The second and third Russian columns are slamming into Telnitz. It's an incredibly uneven fight down there. There are material notes about 12,000 French holding off over 30,000 allies for hours.
But that's exactly what Napoleon was waiting for, them emptying the heights.
Precisely. Around 9 a.m., he sees even more units. Kolarath's and Miloradovich's columns also moving south off the heights. The Allied center is becoming dangerously thin. This is it. He turns to Marshal Soult, whose corps was hidden in the low ground masked by the fog earlier, and gives the order: attack the Pratzen Heights.
Soult's divisions advance uphill.
Van Damme's and St. Hilaire's divisions surge forward, charging up the slopes.
And they succeed. They take the key ground.
They do. Within maybe half an hour, they crash into the surprised, disorganized Allied units still on the heights or trying to redeploy. They push them back, seize the village of Pratzen at the crest. Napoleon's main objective is achieved. The Allied army is split clean in two.
And what about other parts of the battlefield?
Simultaneously, fighting had flared up on the northern flank too. Murat's cavalry and Lannes Corps engaged Bagration and Liechtenstein's forces. After some tough fighting there, the initiative started shifting to the French in the north as well.
So by midday, the picture is becoming clear.
Yeah, by midday, the tide is turned decisively in Napoleon's favor. The Allied center is broken, their army is divided, and the material points out Tsar Alexander and Kutuzov seem unable to mount any coordinated response to the disaster unfolding on the heights.
What does Napoleon do next to press the advantage?
He commits more forces to shatter the Allied center completely. He directs his First Corps to move south from the Pratzen Heights, driving a wedge deeper into the broken Allied line. The main resistance left in the center comes from the elite Russian Imperial Guard.
The Tsar's own guard. Did they make a difference?
They launched a ferocious counterattack. Grand Duke Constantine led them in a charge onto the heights. Material says they were very effective initially, pushing back some French units, almost stabilizing the situation for a moment.
How did Napoleon counter that?
He countered elite with elite. He unleashed his own Imperial Guard cavalry under Marshal Bessières. There was a huge, swirling cavalry battle on the heights. But by about 2 p.m., the French Guard had broken the Russian Guard, forcing them to retreat. That was the final blow. The Allied center was completely shattered beyond any hope of recovery.
So the center is gone, the battle's essentially won, even if fighting continues elsewhere.
Strategically, yes, it's over. The Tsar and Kutuzov flee the battlefield. Down on the Allied left flank near Telnitz and Sokolnitz, those troops are now isolated, probably unaware of just how bad things are on the heights, and they keep fighting for a while. Napoleon starts sending units south from the Pratzen to complete their encirclement.
The retreat must have been horrific for the coalition troops.
Utter chaos and desperation. The material mentions striking details, like soldiers desperately trying to escape south, even resorting to greasing their scabbards to slide across frozen ground or icy ponds.
And there's that grim story about the Satschen Lake.
Yes, a terrible anecdote included in the source material. It reports that over 2,000 retreating Russian soldiers drowned or froze to death when the ice broke as they tried to escape across the frozen Satschen Lake under French artillery fire. A brutal end to the battle for many.
So the end result is clear.
Absolutely. Napoleon's audacious gamble, his brilliant plan, it worked perfectly. The French Grande Armée won a victory that was not just decisive, but utterly crushing at Austerlitz, the Battle of the Three Emperors. And when you look at the aftermath, the numbers really drive home just how crushing that defeat was for the coalition.
Yeah, the material says they lost something like 37% of their entire force in one day, compared to French losses around, 11%?
An absolutely staggering difference. And this victory, it did more than just win a campaign. It completely solidified Napoleon's position. He's emperor, it's only his second year, and he pulls off this. It proved his military genius on the grandest stage imaginable.
Cementing that rise from officer to emperor, and validating the transformation he'd driven in France, militarily and politically. The material calls Austerlitz one of his brilliant military victories.
It really was. Austerlitz made him the most feared commander in Europe. The guy who could, as the source puts it, pull a rabbit out of a hat, the hat-producing commander. France's emperor was now the dominant force on the continent.
What were the immediate political results of this?
Total collapse of the Third Coalition. The Russian armies limped home, defeated Austria. Exhausted, humiliated, they immediately sued for peace, offering Napoleon an armistice.
Which led to the Treaty of Pressburg.
Signed very quickly, December 26, 1805. Austria paid a heavy price. Ceded huge amounts of territory to Napoleon's Kingdom of Italy and to his German allies Bavaria, Württemberg, Baden, completely changing the map of Central Europe. Plus a massive indemnity payment, 40 million francs.
So the Third Coalition dissolved, and Britain once again saw its continental strategy fail, its allies crushed by French arms.
For the third time, yes.
Right.
The material concludes this arc by saying Napoleon, having harnessed that revolutionary dynamism, had now opened the doors completely to an era where he would fundamentally redraw the map of Europe according to French power.
So we've covered a lot of ground here in this deep dive. From the French Revolution's shockwaves, through coalitions forming and falling, Napoleon's stunning rise, his reforms, the strategic dance leading to Austerlitz, and the battle itself.
Yeah, and for you listening, the key things to take away from this material really revolve around understanding Napoleon himself, that unique mix of opportunism, political skill, reformist drive, and sheer military genius. The core system, Ulm, Austerlitz, these weren't accidents.
Right. And grasping the bigger picture, too. How revolutionary ideas fueled armies, how warfare was changing, that fundamental clash between land power and sea power, and how one battle, Austerlitz, could just reshape the entire continent almost overnight.
And why does this matter now? Well, it's not just history homework. Seeing how personality, planning, circumstance, and maybe a bit of luck combined to forge a new European era. You can still see the ripples today, can't you? In borders, laws, national identities.
Definitely. So here's a final thought for you to chew on, directly from the sources we've looked at. The material points out that those earlier peace treaties, like Amiens, left everyone dissatisfied, just setting the stage for more war. And even Austerlitz didn't solve the core problem, that deep rivalry between France and Britain. So was the Napoleonic conflict less about individual battles and treaties and more about this fundamental, maybe irreconcilable clash between two systems, two ambitions, the old monarchies, versus this new French dynamism that simply had to play out until one side was totally dominant? Something to think about.